Man saves crying bear in the middle of the road. You won't believe what happens next. In the heart of Glacier National Park, where snow-fed rivers carve through pine-strewn silence and the wind carries stories older than memory, something extraordinary happened. It didn't begin with a roar. It began with a plea, silent, desperate, and wild. A mother grizzly, frantic with fear, stepped out of the forest and onto a lonely trail, stopping a line of tourists in their tracks. But this wasn't an ambush, it was something else entirely. Among the stunned travelers stood a ranger named Logan, a man who had once saved a bear's life and never expected to see her again, until that moment. What followed was a journey not just through the wilderness, but into a fragile, powerful truth that sometimes the wild doesn't forget, and sometimes, when the moment calls for it, it asks for help. Before we start, click that like and subscribe button so you won't miss out on the coming beautiful stories. The first light of dawn spilled gently across the pines of Glacier National Park, gilding the treetops in soft gold. The forest stirred with quiet life, distant birdsong, the whisper of wind through cedar boughs, the hush of the earth stretching awake. Along a narrow game trail, a grizzly bear mother moved with silent purpose, her muscular frame brushing through the dew-covered undergrowth. Her broad shoulders rolled with each heavy step, her coat a thick blend of dark chocolate and sun-washed silver. Close behind her, patting eagerly on unsteady paws, was her cub, a young grizzly, still small but with the wide face and powerful limbs that marked his lineage. He was barely past the age of weaning, yet bold in the way only the young could be. His nose twitched constantly, ears flicking at every rustle, his rounded body a bundle of untamed energy. While his mother walked with the slow confidence of experience, he darted ahead and fell behind, too excited to stay in step, too innocent to understand danger. The forest was still, the kind of morning that felt untouched, but peace in the wild zone could be deceptive. Near the edge of a rocky clearing, the cub's paws found something strange, loose soil, freshly collapsed, hiding a narrow, dark pit carved into the earth by erosion and time. He leaned closer, sniffing, fascinated by the unfamiliar shape. Then, before the mother could grunt a warning, the ground gave way. The cub fell with a startled cry, the sharp yelp slicing through the still morning like a broken cord. The grizzly mother spun instantly, thundering toward the pit. She roared once, a deep, guttural sound that shook the air, and peered down. Her cub was there, scrambling, his long claws scraping against the walls. But the pit was too steep, the soil too brittle. Dust rose with each panicked movement. The cub tried to climb, slipped, and fell again, crying out in exhaustion. She swiped at the rim, trying to dig her way in, but the earth only collapsed more. Her roars grew. She circled the hole again and again, massive paws pressing into the soil, her thick fur rippling with each desperate breath. But there was no path in that didn't risk burying them both. Then she stilled. She looked down at her cub one final time, eyes wide with agony, and made a choice. With one last glance, the grizzly bear turned and lumbered into the forest. Not in retreat, but with fierce direction. Toward the trail. Toward the road. Toward the only creature she knew who might help. Humans. The forest gave way to a winding trail, narrow and packed with gravel, bordered by layers of pine and spruce. A slow-moving convoy of off-road vehicles snaked along the path, 3 jeeps filled with tourists bundled in jackets, cameras slung over shoulders, their eyes scanning the trees for glimpses of wild elk or distant moose. At the lead was Logan, a seasoned wildlife ranger and tour guide, with 20 years of Glacier National Park written into the lines around his eyes. He had led hundreds of sunrise drives like this, each one a delicate balance of wilderness and safety, wonder and caution. He was pointing out a distant bald eagle when the radio on his dashboard crackled. That's when he saw her. From the brush, a grizzly bear burst into the road, not charging, but moving fast, her massive form catching the early light. Dust kicked up behind her. Tires screeched. The convoy jolted to a halt. Gasps filled the vehicles. Cameras were dropped. Windows rolled up in haste. Logan's hand went instinctively to the radio, but he didn't reach for a weapon. He stepped out. "Stay in the vehicles," he called over his shoulder. The bear stood in the middle of the road now, heaving, her flanks rising and falling with every breath. But she didn't posture. She didn't rear. She didn't roar. She just looked at him. Something in her eyes stopped him cold. Recognition. He stepped forward slowly, his boots crunching on gravel. "It's you," he whispered under his breath. 3 years ago, the park had drowned. A relentless storm had battered Glacier for days, unleashing rain that turned rivers into torrents and carved out new paths through entire valleys. Trails were washed away. Trees fell like matchsticks. Wildlife scrambled for high ground, some vanishing into the floodwaters before help could ever reach them. Logan had been out on emergency patrol when he found her, the female grizzly wedged against a rock shelf near the edge of the river's violent swell. Her body soaked, her leg pinned beneath a collapsed log thick with moss and debris. Her coat was matted with mud and blood. Her breath was shallow, more shudder than rhythm. Her head barely lifted when he approached. Most would have assumed she was already gone. But something in her eyes, glassy but focused, dim but unbroken, made Logan stop in his tracks. She was still fighting. Still holding on. He had no backup that day. No vehicle access. Just a radio with intermittent signal and his own 2 hands. He tossed his pack, dropped to his knees in the rising water. It had taken nearly an hour to free her, cutting away branches, levering the log with everything he had, whispering to her the whole time. Though he knew she couldn't understand, or maybe she could. Because she never lashed out. Never roared. She only watched him, her gaze locked on his every movement, like she was deciding if he was friend or final mistake. When the weight finally shifted and her leg came free, she collapsed into the riverbank, unable to move. Logan hauled her out of the shallows, drenched to the bone, and covered her with his emergency thermal tarp. He stayed with her that entire night, crouched under a rain-slicked ledge, checking her breathing, feeding her water by hand, brushing debris from her face. By morning, the rain had stopped. The river had lowered. And the bear, still weak, still limping, rose shakily to her feet. She didn't growl. Didn't run. She looked back at him once, her golden brown eyes holding something close to understanding. Then she turned and vanished into the forest. He hadn't seen her again. Not until now. And as she stood in the middle of the trail, larger, scarred, but unmistakably the same, Logan felt a strange tightness in his chest. Her right shoulder still bore the faint white ridge of that old wound. She remembered him. He didn't know how. Couldn't explain why. But he saw it in her eyes. The bear let out a low, strained sound, not aggressive, but guttural, almost. She lowered her head, then stepped forward and gently rubbed it against Logan's thigh, the way a cub might nudge its mother. Tourists inside the jeeps gasped. Cameras clicked. Logan didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly placed his hand on the thick fur behind her ear. "What is it?" he asked softly, as if she could answer. She stepped away, turned toward the forest, then paused. Looked back at him. Her breath trembled. Her body shook. Not from exhaustion, but from urgency. Then she took another step, this time glancing behind her and waiting. Logan understood. He turned back toward the jeeps. "Everyone stay calm," he said. "She wants us to follow her." A few wide-eyed tourists cracked open their doors. "Are you serious?" one murmured. "I've seen her before." "She trusts us," Logan said. "We're going to help." He grabbed his gear from the back of the lead vehicle, his satchel, utility belt, and radio, and signaled two of the more curious guests to come with him. The others he asked to remain inside and wait. And then, quietly, the ranger and the mother grizzly disappeared into the forest together. The forest closed in quickly as Logan followed the mother grizzly off the trail and into the undergrowth. Two tourists kept close behind him, both experienced hikers, quiet, respectful. The rest of the group remained at the convoy, as instructed, watching from the road, the stillness around them broken only by the distant call of ravens. The bear led them with purpose, not at full charge, but fast enough to keep them moving at a steady pace. Her powerful frame pushed through branches and brush like a shadow of the landscape itself. Every few paces, she glanced back, checking to see if they followed. Her trust was raw and real, but it was also desperate. Something was wrong. Logan could feel it. They moved quickly, ducking beneath moss-draped limbs and over a winding creek that glittered in the early sun. Logan had hiked this region countless times, but the route the bear carved was unfamiliar, wild, untraveled. It was nearly silent, except for the snap of twigs and the heavy rhythm of boots on packed earth. Then, faintly, a sound broke the quiet, a high-pitched cry. Sharp, then fading. Then rising again. Weak, but alive. The bear stopped. Her ears twitched. Her entire body stiffened, every muscle tense beneath her thick fur. Then she let out a low growl and pressed forward with renewed urgency. Logan picked up his pace, leaping over a fallen log, adrenaline burning in his chest. The cries grew louder, closer now, more frantic. It was unmistakable, a cub. After nearly a kilometer of weaving through the dense underbrush, ducking beneath low-hanging limbs and scrambling over exposed roots, the forest began to thin. The mother grizzly pushed ahead without pause, her pace growing faster as a faint whimpering sound carried through the trees, high-pitched, desperate, alive. Then all at once, the trees parted into a wide clearing dappled in morning light. The ground was uneven, dotted with jagged stones and patches of brittle yellow grass that crackled underfoot. But Logan's eyes were drawn immediately to the far edge of the clearing, where the earth sank sharply into shadow. There, yawning before them, was the pit. It was narrow, only a few feet across, but deceptively deep. The walls sloped in jagged layers of dry, packed earth, steep and unforgiving. Around the rim, the soil was disturbed, clawed at, as if something, or someone, had tried over and over to claw their way free. The mother bear raced forward in a blur of muscle and urgency. She reached the edge and skidded to a halt, her paws displacing a puff of dust that drifted into the air. With a deep, guttural huff, she leaned over the rim, her entire body trembling as she let out a low, mournful growl that rippled across the clearing like thunder. Logan and the two tourists approached cautiously, breath tight, legs moving on instinct more than thought. Logan signaled for the others to hang back slightly as he stepped closer. He reached the edge and dropped to a crouch, and there, down in the dark, curled in on himself like a question mark, was the cub. His small body was coated in a thick layer of dust and dried mud. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, the rhythm uneven. One leg twitched feebly. His paws, broad but still clumsy with youth, scraped at the wall, dragging through loose soil, leaving behind faint trails of struggle. His claws had worn dull from the effort. Each attempt to rise ended in collapse. Logan swallowed hard. "He's alive," he murmured. Relief washed through him like a tide, but it was tempered by the urgency of the moment. Beside him, the mother bear grunted low in her throat. She began to dig frantically, pawing at the dirt near the rim, but the earth only crumbled further with each swipe. Her claws were too large for precision, her strength too great for the fragile edge. She stepped back and let out a growl so raw it vibrated in Logan's ribs. Then she leaned forward again and nudged at the ground with her massive snout, as if she could somehow push it open, create a path where none existed. The noise she made was unlike anything Logan had heard before, a cross between a moan and a plea. It was unbearable. Logan crouched closer, one hand reaching instinctively toward the bear's massive shoulder before catching himself. He didn't need to touch her. She didn't need comfort. She needed action. He peered into the pit again, heart pounding. The cub blinked up at the light, eyes dull but aware. "We've got you," Logan whispered, steadying his breath. "Just hold on, little one. Help's coming." And in that instant, he knew this moment wasn't just about rescue. It was about restoring what should have never been separated, a mother and her child, a bond far older than words. Behind him, the tourists stood still, silent in awe, not just of the cub's plight, but of the raw, unfiltered bond unfolding before them. And somewhere beneath that rising sun and open sky, man and bear stood shoulder to shoulder, ready to act. Logan rose to his feet, his mind already cycling through possibilities. The pit was too deep to climb into safely, and too narrow for a person and a cub to fit comfortably. One wrong move could collapse the walls or injure the little one further. He turned to the two tourists behind him. "Stay here with her," he said, nodding toward the mother grizzly, who now paced anxiously around the rim. "Don't block her line of sight. Just be still." Then he took off running back through the trees, retracing their steps as quickly as he dared. The cries of the cub echoed behind him, growing fainter with distance but sharper in urgency. When he reached the trailhead and the waiting vehicles, he went straight for the supply bin in the lead jeep. He pulled out a sturdy rope, a metal bucket used for water collection, and a compact carabiner hook. Tourists gathered around him with wide eyes, watching his movements like they were witnessing something sacred. "Anyone strong enough to help me lower and pull?" he asked. A man stepped forward, followed by a woman with climbing gloves already on her hands. "We've got you," the woman said. Within minutes, they were racing back into the woods. When they returned, the cub's cries had softened into whimpers. The mother bear was still there, head low, eyes locked on the pit. But when she saw Logan again, she let out a low, throaty sound that made something inside him ache. He set the bucket near the edge and tied the rope tightly to its handle. Then, anchoring the other end to a tree root and handing it to the volunteers, he began to slowly lower the bucket into the pit. The cub stirred at the motion. At first, he flinched, startled by the shifting light and the scrape of metal. But then a deep, familiar growl came from above, the mother bear, reassuring, grounding. The cub stilled. Logan crouched at the edge, careful not to lean too far. "It's okay, little one," he murmured. "Climb in. You can do it." The cub sniffed the air, then the bucket. For a moment, it seemed too tired, too unsure. But then one paw, then another, slowly wobbling, the little grizzly pulled himself into the bucket and collapsed inside, his sides rising and falling with effort. Logan held his breath. "Now," he said. Together, the group began to pull. The rope creaked under the strain but held. Inch by inch, the bucket rose, swaying slightly as it neared the rim. The mother bear circled frantically, snorting and pacing. Then at last, the bucket cleared the edge. Logan reached out and carefully cradled the cub in his arms, dusty, trembling, but alive. He set him gently on the ground, and in a blur of fur and sound, the mother bear rushed in, wrapping her body around her cub, nuzzling and licking and rumbling deep with a sound that shook the trees. She had her baby back. And for a moment, the whole forest stood still. The moment the cub was on the ground, the mother grizzly surged forward, not with violence, not with fear, but with overwhelming relief. She lowered her massive head and nuzzled the tiny body, licking his fur in long, sweeping strokes that were equal parts grooming and prayer. Her deep, breathy huffs trembled through the clearing. The cub whimpered softly, curling into her warmth like a baby finding the rhythm of its mother's heartbeat again. The people around them stood silent, breath held, hearts pounding, not in fear now, but awe. Some had tears in their eyes. Others simply stood still, cameras forgotten in their hands. Logan took one step back, giving the bear space. His hands still held the rope, his sleeves dusted with soil, but he couldn't stop watching. His heartbeat, slower now, steadier. There was something holy in this reunion. She didn't just want help, one tourist whispered. She knew exactly who to ask. Logan said nothing. He didn't have the words. The mother bear lay down, wrapping a foreleg protectively over her cub, her eyes soft, no longer wild with panic. The cub, though tired, nuzzled her chest and let out a low, fluttering grunt, the kind only young bears make when they feel completely safe. Moments later, a quiet voice spoke behind Logan. "I brought something," said one of the tourists, gently lifting a small canvas bag from his backpack. Inside were a few ripe apples and sliced pears, meant for trail snacks, now transformed into an offering. Logan took the fruit and approached slowly, holding it low and open-palmed. The mother grizzly lifted her head, sniffed the air, and without rising, stretched her neck forward. Carefully, she took an apple from his hand. Then another. She chewed slowly, watching him the entire time, not with suspicion, just awareness. Logan laid the rest of the fruit near her paws, then stepped back. The cub, now more alert, reached out and gnawed on a piece of pear, his tiny teeth crunching softly. There was no fear. No barrier. Only understanding. Laughter bubbled out among the group, quiet, cautious, but joyful. Cameras clicked now, not to capture danger, but to remember peace. The light filtering through the trees had turned golden. Birds resumed their song, as if giving permission to feel happiness again. One of the tourists whispered, "I've never seen anything like this." "No one has," Logan murmured. As the bears ate, the cub slowly stood and took a few wobbly steps, his fur still dusty, his eyes bright. The mother licked him again, as if checking every inch to be sure he was real, that he had truly returned. And for a moment, they looked like two travelers preparing to resume their path, not survivors, but companions, not broken by what had happened, but shaped by it, bonded in a way that had no words, only breath and memory. The cub stood a little taller now, his movements stronger, more certain, as if the act of surviving had already made him older. Beside him, the mother grizzly exhaled slowly, her massive frame rising and falling in a rhythm that spoke not of rest, but of peace. Logan stepped back to the edge of the clearing, boots crunching softly against the damp earth. The tourists followed him instinctively, mirroring his quiet, as though they understood that something sacred had taken place. None of them spoke. No one dared to. Cameras hung loose by their sides, forgotten. This was not a moment to capture, it was a moment to feel. From where they stood, the bears looked like a painting, two silhouettes of golden-brown fur dusted with sunlight, surrounded by the towering sentinels of Glacier's old-growth forest. Time itself seemed to pause. Even the wind stilled. The cub curled again beside his mother, and she leaned in to nuzzle him once more, as if anchoring herself in the warmth of his survival. The moment held, and then, slowly, it settled, like leaves drifting to the forest floor. The crisis had passed, but something deeper remained, gratitude, not the kind that is spoken aloud, wrapped in thanks or ceremony. No, this gratitude ran quieter than words, carried in a glance, a breath, a single pause in motion. The kind of thanks that lives in the space between beings who've chosen not to fear one another, who for one rare moment have trusted instead. Logan could feel it, not just in his chest, but in the silence that surrounded them all. The kind of silence that speaks. He knew they wouldn't linger much longer. The wild doesn't wait, and it doesn't explain itself, it moves on. But before they left, the mother bear lifted her head. Her eyes found Logan's across the distance, dark, steady, deep. A long look. Quiet. Unmistakable. Thank you. She didn't roar. She didn't come closer. She didn't need to. Everything she meant to say was already said in that gaze, in the simple, powerful way the wild remembers those who choose to care. The sun had climbed higher now, its warmth stretching across the clearing like a quiet blessing. The mother grizzly and her cub lay together in the grass, bellies full, coats brushed by soft wind. The cub's strength had returned enough for him to rise and wobble through the tall stems, pawing gently at his mother's side, as if to urge her toward play. She rumbled softly and nosed him back down, licking behind his ears with a kind of tenderness only wild mothers knew. Around them, the forest had returned to itself, alive, breathing, unchanged and yet entirely altered. The tourists stood quietly, watching from a respectful distance. Every face bore the same expression, reverence. Their trip had begun as an ordinary tour through Glacier's wilderness. It had become something else entirely, something they would tell their grandchildren about, something they'd never quite be able to explain. Logan stood slightly apart from the group, hands on his hips, face tilted toward the sky. He'd seen many things in his decades on the land. He'd pulled calves from frozen streams, stood between hikers and wolves, once even faced down a moose charging at full tilt. But nothing had ever felt like this. Because this wasn't a moment of danger. This was grace. The mother bear stretched and rose to her feet. Her cub followed quickly, shaking off bits of grass and dust like a pup waking from a dream. The two of them stood together in profile, tall, steady, whole. For a long breath, they lingered at the edge of the clearing. Then the mother bear turned her head. She looked back, right at Logan. Her eyes, deep and dark and lit by something ancient, met his without flinching. And in that look, there was no fear, no hesitation. There was recognition. 3 years ago, she had looked up at him from beneath floodwaters, half dead and full of pain. He had pulled her from the river, given her another chance. Today, she had returned the trust. No roar. No growl. Just a soft exhale. A sound like the wind moving through pine. The cub glanced back too, his head tilted, nose twitching, curious, grateful, maybe even proud. Then they turned together and stepped into the trees, vanishing not with a crash or scramble but with silent grace, like they belonged to something older than sound. The tourists slowly lowered their cameras. No one spoke for a while. Logan remained still, watching the last rustle of branches fall into stillness. The trail they left was already fading, swallowed by sunlight and shadows. "They're gone," someone said quietly. "No," Logan replied. "They're just where they're meant to be." The group began to gather, packing their things, voices hushed. A few took one last photo of the clearing, though they all knew the real image was already burned into memory. Logan lingered, walking once around the spot where the cub had been lifted from the earth. The rope still lay coiled near the pit's edge. He picked it up, dusted it off, and stowed it in his pack, his hands moving with care, not haste. Then he looked up toward the tree line one more time. "Be safe out there," he said softly. And somehow, he knew they would be. Some stories unfold in silence, whispered not in words but in gestures, in footsteps through tall grass, in the shared glance between a man and a bear. This was one of those stories. A story about a cub that fell, and a mother who refused to give up. A ranger who once saved a life, only to find that life returning the trust. A group of people who witnessed something wild and walked away changed. But more than anything, this was a story about the invisible threads that bind us, between human and animal, past and present, survival and grace. In a world that often draws hard lines between us and them, between the tamed and the untamed, the civilized and the wild, this moment shattered those lines. It reminded us that compassion doesn't speak only one language. That trust, when freely given, can echo for years. That gratitude isn't always spoken aloud. Sometimes, it walks on four legs and disappears into the trees with one last look. Logan didn't need the bears to stay. He didn't need them to return again. He had already received something most people never do, a moment of pure connection with the natural world, untouched by fear or force. A moment of being trusted by the very life he had sworn to protect. And perhaps, as we step away from the story, we take with us more than admiration, we take a quiet call to action, to protect what is fragile, to answer when nature knocks, to believe that even the wildest hearts remember kindness. Because sometimes, the greatest honor isn't in saving a life, it's in being remembered by it. If you enjoyed this story, give us a like and subscribe, and comment down below what you think about this story. Thank you for watching and listening.